Well, welcome back everybody to the online program for the alumni of the Sunshine Coast Health Center, and our topic has been theories of addiction, and particularly those that have been brought up by Robert West, who's a British psychologist who spent his career studying addiction. And in a very interesting book he wrote called Theory of Addiction, he described 30 different scientifically based theories on what an addiction is. And when he looked through them, he got a bit disappointed, because what he noticed is that the theories were not what he called incremental science. They were simply, it looked to him as if these theories were just coming from here, there, and everywhere based on what the particular theorists or their background was and what they believed in. So we couldn't find much. He didn't. There was a lot of overlap, and some theories were strong in one area and weak in others, and some addressed issues, very important issues, and others just apparently just totally forgot about them. And he was quite upset by that. So he looked at all these theories, and he tried to come up with his own theory, integrating all the key points from all the other theories, which you can imagine is quite a remarkable achievement. And what is perhaps even weirder is that there's only a handful of people who have ever bothered to do this, as strange as that may sound, right? And he says most theories of addiction are actually a lot better on paper than they are on real life, because a lot of times people are just not paying attention to each other. And he names two other researchers who have actually attempted this thing, and I can think of a handful of others who have done it. But he came up with his own, and this is again, it's quite remarkable that so few people are actually taking all of this mass of knowledge we have and try to integrate it to come up with some kind of perspective on what this thing, addiction, really is all about. At any rate, Robert West's view is pretty sophisticated and pretty comprehensive, and he does say it's a draft, right? Because it is kind of complicated to take all these different ideas and put them together. But his main point is that addiction is best understood as a motivational problem. Now, motivation is really tricky, and it's very complicated. It has important things in brain chemistry. It's got important things in psychology. It has influences from the environment, from culture, from issues of identity. So one of West's big points is motivation is not some kind of simple little idea. And in fact, motivation is even a lot more complicated than the brain chemistry experts talk about when they talk about motivation. So, and one of his key points is that motivation often changes. Maybe it'll change. People are motivated for one thing one time in the day and not another. Maybe people will be triggered by hunger, right? You go to the grocery store when you're hungry, you're buying everything. If you go to the grocery store after you eat a big meal, don't really get triggered that much by the food, right? So he knows that it may depend on your physical state, may depend on how old you are, may depend on what whether you're depressed at the time, or all of these influences come into play with addiction, according to Robert West. And so this whole addiction thing becomes quite complicated. Maybe you would be triggered by one thing if you were sad, but not triggered by it if you were happy. Maybe you'd be triggered by one thing if you're sitting in a bar, but not triggered with it if you were sitting in grandma's house, right? All of these influences, everything's very fluid and lots of competition. And I always think of West's theory. It's actually a theory of motivational dominance. What's going to dominate at this particular time and under these particular circumstances, given what I'm feeling and given my physical state and all these other things. And this is, so West gives this example so he says, and a smoking example, because that's actually his specialty. He says, imagine a person on an airplane who has a very severe craving. They really want to smoke, but they're in an airplane, right? And they tell you before you take off there's smoke detectors in the bathrooms and all that. So you have to make this judgment call, right? And you got to decide, well, geez, is it worth it for me to go smoke in the bathroom and satisfy this craving and yet risk ridicule from the flight attendants, people looking, all the other passengers looking at you oddly, and then being arrested when you touch down, right? Is it worth it? And always measuring this kind of thing, right? And so this is West's theory, and it becomes quite complicated because it depends on so many factors coming into play. But West threw it out as a way of trying to understand addiction. But some of the key points are that, one, this is a matter of motivation. What's going to dominate the motivation? What's going to create the excessive motivation for the drug use? But so many factors come into play. The environment comes into play, your brain chemistry comes into play. All of these things are working together to create this dominant motivation at the moment. Anyway, it's a very interesting theory, and he makes comments about, for example, the environmental influence. So he believes that we should crank up the price of all the drugs, make them much more difficult to get, because that'll account for this environmental influence. He suggests that, for example, one of his more controversial points, he says that one of the very famous models in treatment that we're called the trans-theoretical model of stages of change, where we would actually interview the individual addict and determine where they are, what stage they're at in the change process. And he said, yeah, that probably isn't a good idea, because people react more to what's immediately in their environment, in this immediate situation. So much better not to figure out where they are in life and their motivation change, but to deal with the immediate situation. So, anyway, but a very interesting theory. And again, one of the very few people who has actually tried to integrate all of these different theories from brain science, from psychology, from environmental studies, all these kinds of things. Anyway, that's it for this topic for the alumni program, and we'll be back next time with another topic.